Welcome to the 3 and 2 What's He Gonna Do podcast. I'm Dan Zielinski of the thirdmanin.com, joined by Colin Cannonberg of statswipe.com. Colin, Brewers played well, ran into a tough test against the Atlanta Braves though Friday night.
Yeah, rough game, especially for one notable pitcher. Aside from that, though, I mean, if anyone looking at the final score saw, they would have thought it was a close game when it was completely different. It was not a close game until that ninth inning.
Yeah, well, we can dive into. First, I want to talk about Chassin. I mean, five innings, 3 earned runs. His ERA is still around 4.65. I think that's more of kind of the pitcher the Brewers can expect him to be. I mean, I always thought last year was kind of a career year, one year type deal. I never thought he was going to be a solid number 2 or 3. Always thought he was going to be more of a 4 or 5.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. I mean, even his step last year was a good, two runs higher than what his ERA indicated. So it was inevitable that he was gonna come back down to earth this year.
And Corbin Burns, wow, we've talked about him before on this podcast, and he's actually pitching well in relief, I think. Every time I saw him, but then he just got blown up. I mean, I couldn't have done worse than he did last night.
It was brutal to watch. I mean, he gave up 7 earned runs on 3 home runs, and also decided to walk 2 batters. But in typical style, he also struck out 2, so would have known he could have maybe given up 1 more home run, but he would have struck out the side had they let him finish that inning.
The guy just has. I mean, he's more of a 2-pitch pitcher like that. Like I wrote about a few weeks ago, relies heavily on that fastball, probably way too much, 66% when they demoted him after his rough start in the rotation. But this is a guy who dominated every level coming up, and then pitched well last year, and then all of a sudden has struggled this year. Part of me thinks it's because he's used his fastball way too much, but there has to be something more wrong with him. I mean, you don't just every time you go out just get lit up by different teams. I don't know. Something's got to be more. Maybe with tipping pitches. I don't know.
Yeah, I think this case, I almost want to just forgive last night. He made a couple bad pitches, but until that point, his previous 5 outings, he didn't give up any runs.
Yeah.
And had a really good series against Chicago, where he had 2 appearances and had 1 hold against Chicago, and pitched really well. I mean, you could see he was turning the corner. Pitched well against Washington. Pitched well against New York. Pitched really well against Philadelphia. 2 innings, 4 strikeouts, only giving up 2 hits.
So Corbin Burns, do you think he's a guy that the Brewers can count on moving forward, or are you worried about him after last night's performance?
I'd write it off as a bad start. Ever since he got moved to the bullpen, he's been really good, and he showed last year he was good in the bullpen. So I think write it off. He made some bad pitches, as pitchers usually do at times. So I wouldn't be too worried after last night. I think he can get back to doing what he did his previous 5 outings. That's more of what I would expect.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think both kind of agree on this. His role moving forward might be best as a reliever. I know I wrote a few weeks ago how the Brewers can't give up on him being a starter, but I think at least moving forward the rest of the year, he's got to be reliever only, because he's a 2-pitch guy, almost a 1-pitch guy really, with his fastball, throwing it over 60% last time I looked. And he's better served in the bullpen this year. Maybe next in the offseason he develops a 3rd pitch, something I don't know why he didn't do, I guess, in the offseason coming into this year, knowing he was going to be a starter. But They need him to be a valuable guy of their pitching staff in any capacity this year because it's not like they can afford to go sign Craig Kimbrell, and they have really no one to call up besides Jimmy Nelson once he gets healthy, and hopefully he gets healthy soon because they could use his depth.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, have you?
Well, did you see how Jimmy Nelson has done in his rehab?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you about that. He's pitched well.
Yeah, like really well.
Here, let me pull up his numbers. Last night in his third rehab appearance at AAA, he went 5 2/3 innings scoreless. Struck out 8, walked 1, allowed 3 singles, fastball in the 92-93 range, 86 pitches. They said he's got one more rehab start at AAA, and then his kind of after that is to be determined. So he might only be 2 weeks away from being back in a Brewer uniform, which has been almost 2 years since that happened.
Right.
Which is crazy. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know what you can expect from him, but if he can be a just innings eater and give you quality starts, I think that's what you could hope for, hopefully.
Right. Yeah. I think I wouldn't expect him to be like in form that he was in just before he got injured, but he was a top 10 pitcher in all of baseball when he left with injury. So, but hopefully he can just be a serviceable guy and just give the Brewers a chance at winning.
Yeah, he was probably a number 2 guy. I mean, he was dealing when.
Oh, yeah. He was incredible before. I think people forget just how good he was before he got injured.
I wonder if he's healthy and a solid at least number 3 last year, if the Brewers make it to the World Series, because that's really what they needed.
Yeah.
Because their pitching fell and kind of they were relying on Hader too much probably towards the end.
Oh yeah, they definitely were. They needed some more. They needed much more depth last year in that pitching. I guess the transition to another team in the division. Chris Bryant has been heating up for the Cubs. Like last night, he hit 3 home runs. He went 4 for 6 with 5 RBIs. Since April 26th, he's been on a tear. He has 11 home runs now within the last not even a month. So he's picking it up quick, and weighted runs created plus of 161, hitting 277, 405, 581. He looks like he's getting back into that MVP caliber form, which can be scary for the Brewers.
Yeah, because he's really has all the tools to be like a superstar. And last year, I can't remember exactly. I think some injuries played a part of it, but also just he never really found his groove at the plate and really struggled all year when he was healthy. Yeah. And that we talked about Jimmy Nelson, how he could have maybe taken the Brewers to the World Series with his addition last year. With Chris Bryant hitting at least maybe closer to an all-star level, who knows what the Cubs do last year, because they really needed a big bat in that lineup, and they didn't have that.
Yeah, that's true. That's why this year they're so good. It's Wilson Contreras, who had a down year last year, is also he's in the top 5 in WAR this year in the NL so far. And with Chris Bryant hitting, Baez is still hitting like an all-star. Even Jason Hayward is hitting the ball this year a bit more than previously. So altogether, that team they're looking much better than they were last year as well.
How's Kyle Schwarber doing? Oh, he's not doing anything.
What?
Kyle Schwarber's hitting 220 with.
Oh yeah, Schwarber's still useless.
Yeah.
But could see that coming. I never liked Schwarber.
How about my guy Ian Happ? I know he's in AAA, I believe. I think they demoted him still.
Yeah, he's still striking out.
He was a nice player coming out of Cincinnati. Oh yeah, heck. You know your your career is in jeopardy when you're hitting 229 in AAA and have 40 strikeouts compared to 26 walks and
Oh,
69 plate appearances.
yikes. That is bad.
He's got, 4 home runs, 21, yeah. Yikes.
Well, if it means anything to him, when I think of Ian Happ, I think of that opening day home run against Miami that he hit on the first pitch last year.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. Who was that off of? Edison Volquez or I don't know.
No, it was it Urena?
Oh, yeah, it might have been. I don't know. Either some washed-up veteran or some no-name 21-year-old that no one else has heard of.
That's all the Marlins have.
Yeah, exactly. What? Talking about another superstar, Bryce Harper leads Major League Baseball in strikeouts, leads the NL in walks, but's also hitting in the 220s. Is he a guy? I don't know what to make of him. I think his career is going to always be as a good player, not an all-time great or even great player. He's had 1.5 good seasons. I don't know.
I guess just with all the hype that's been around him, he's never really lived up to it. He's never quite lived up to that. So I don't know. I think he's still getting on base. I mean, the Phillies
getting on
take
base.
comfort in that. And, once the bat gets going, who knows? That's why he's got such a high ceiling.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a perfect Oakland Athletics player because he gets on base, but
yeah, exactly.
Great movie. Yeah, I just don't know what to think. I don't know. He's been in the league for 8 years, had some injuries, granted, but I don't know if it's just because of his hype or what that I look at him and I'm like, wow, he's really disappointing of a player, even though he got paid and whatever. I don't know. It's just 8 years. His numbers leave a lot to be desired. Like right now, if he plays another 8 years, well, granted, I guess this year's not over. He's only going to be over 400 home runs in 16 years. I mean, with the hype this guy had, you thought he was going to be just winning MVP after MVP, kind of like Mike Trout has in the AL. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's always been the comparison is Harper versus Trout, especially in the year that Harper won the MVP. That was a big deal then when those two were kind of in the same sentence.
I will say, though, after Christian Yelich, Nolan Arenado has got to be the best player in the NL, but that's just me.
Yeah, I've always loved Nado. It'll be sad if he never wins an MVP because I think he's deserving of it.
Yeah, this is impressive. So he's won the Golden Glove Award, Silver Slugger in the last 4 years, and he's finished 8th in MVP, 5th, 4th, and 3rd. I mean, he's like right there, but it always seems like last year it was Christian Yelich comes out of nowhere and does something. Year before it was Giancarlo Stanton. I mean, it's just like he's that good, reliable guy on both sides of the ball that you want and really is like a superstar and one of the best players in the league. But I feel like 90% of people in this country don't know who he is either.
Yeah, that's true. Just because Colorado isn't really, they don't really have a strong fan base. Being one of those expansion teams haven't really been known.
I mean, I'm surprised too how they've kind of struggled this year, Colorado, and
yeah, they were supposed to be decent.
Their pitching just hasn't produced like it did last year, and that's really the key for them because they always have the offense. It comes down to pitching.
Yeah. Well, even their offense at the beginning of the season, I think it was through the first 3 weeks of the season, I think they had the worst offense. They were slow to get going. Yeah,
that's true. Speaking of another superstar or ex-superstar, Albert Pujols, recently went over 2,000 RBIs, he's got to become a little. I know his numbers aren't great. 8 home runs, 23 RBIs, 241 batting average, but he's kind of played well recently, which since like he
Yeah, I
left
saw when he had
St.
that
Louis, yeah.
I saw when he had that 2 home run game. I'm like, huh, good for him.
Who's less talked about now, Miguel Cabrera or Albert Pujols?
Probably Cabrera.
He's-
It's sad to think about, though. It's really sad. Those 10 years ago, they were how we're talking about Mike Trout and Christian Yelich. Now they've faded away, and it was just so gradual too. It's just they're gone. Like I don't even know how that happened in fantasy baseball. The point at which you drop them and that they're unrosterable in fantasy baseball. It's like
yeah.
It used to be a number 1 pick every year.
Yeah, I mean Miguel Cabrera has had some injuries the last couple of years, but like he's been back this entire year and he's got 1 home run, 16 RBIs, 290 batting average, 42 strikeouts compared to 16 walks. I mean, he was never a guy that he struck out a bit, but he also walked usually a decent amount and always hit for some average and power, but like I don't know. 36 years old.
I think Miggy was one of the best hitters.
Oh yeah.
I think he was the most pure hitter.
Yeah.
That we've seen. Just his whole approach to that was amazing. I really liked how Miggy hit the ball.
The Miguel Cabrera trade just defines the Miami Marlins and their inability to evaluate talent. Let me pull this trade up because it's funny to look at. So the Marlins traded Miguel Cabrera and Dontrelle Willis, who had like 3 good years and was actually fun to watch, for Andrew Miller, Dallas Trerin, Eligio De La Cruz, Burke Badenhop, former Brewer, outfielder Cameron Maben, and catcher Mike Ribello. They got absolutely no one for one of the best players of this generation, really. Guy who won a triple crown. And
yeah, I know. That's typical Marlins, giving away good talent.
I mean, Andrew Miller was a bust as a starting pitcher. He finally found it as a reliever, but still, even if Andrew Miller is a decent starter, what he is now and was still with them, that trade still looks terrible. But
yeah, it does.
Yeah, typical Marlins.
It's sad. I mean, Albert Pujols was just an animal back in the day. I think people forget just how good he was.
He was such a feared hitter. I don't know.
From 2001 all the way until 2010, he had at least a 5-WAR season on Fangraphs. Wow. At least 5, and that was one season. Usually, he's above 7 all of those years. It's just consistent greatness.
Yeah, he doesn't have a Baseball Reference page as Barry Bonds, but it's pretty impressive still, nevertheless. I still wish he would have stayed with...
Ever since he got the Angels, it's been 0.5, 2.7, 1.6, 0.8, negative 1.9, negative 0.2, and now this year 0.1. So, yeah.
I know Pujols was hurt because like the Cardinals supposedly offered him a 5-year deal at first and then eventually offered him a 10-year, $210 million, which was $44 million less than the Angels did. But it would have been nice if he sticked with the Cardinals for his entire career. Or, which is even funnier too, the Marlins offered him a 10-year contract, which, geez, typical Marlins throwing around money. And then they would have probably traded him in 2 years anyways. But I wish he would have stayed with the Cardinals. I think that would have been good for baseball and probably better for him overall with his career.
It would have. You kind of have to hope he would have been a franchise guy. But it's crazy now. I mean, all the years with the Angels, he'll be an Angel just as long as he was a Cardinal.
Yeah.
But Cardinals got the best of him.
Oh yeah, definitely. And granted, giving a 10-year deal is never a good idea, but I don't know. I remember seeing that deal come across the wire, and I was surprised. I never thought Pujols would play with a different team, but he has, and he hasn't played well. So oh well.
Did you realize? And this is Albert Pujols. He stole 16 bases 2 times in his career.
Really? I guess he was probably in better shape then.
In 2005 and in 2009, he stole 16 bases in 2 years.
That's crazy. You would not expect that at all from him. And reading this article more about this contract situation when he was a free agent, the Marlins offer was supposedly around the Angels in terms of money, but the Marlins refused to include a no trade clause. Typical Marlins, they would have traded him within 2 years probably.
Yeah, they would have. Wow. Albert Pujols, it's crazy looking at his walk and strikeout percentages on the Cardinals. So his walk percentages averaged around 14%, while his strikeouts were around 8%.
Jeez.
Really good.
Yeah.
And now on the Angels, his strikeout percent is around 12, and his walk percent is around 7.5.
Yikes.
He's completely flipped the script.
Yeah, that's not something you would have ever thought of, like Pujols until he got to the Angels. He was just a guy who hit for average, drew walks, and I don't know. Sad fall for one of the greats.
He hit over 300 from 2001 to 2010. Every season he hit over 300. And in 2011 he had 299, so pretty much 300.
He's a first ballot Hall of Famer. I'll be curious to see.
It'll be interesting if he's unanimous.
The one thing that worries me about the percentage, though, is all these young voters are going to remember the last 10 years of his career. But, I mean, I think, he's a no-doubter, obviously, and should at least get 90% of the votes. There's always some knuckleheads that don't vote for players, but it's crazy to think because, his decline was just so, sudden that, he's one of the best players of all time, but, recent memory doesn't tell you that.
Yeah.
So, well, any other topics you want to debate before we get into listener questions?
No, I think that's all I've got for banter for now.
Yeah. A question I got was from Josh from Kettle Hills. What do we think of the Brewers, and do they have enough to catch up with the Cardinals and be one of the top teams in the NL again this year?
Can you repeat that again?
Josh wants to know, do we think the Brewers can compete with the Cubs, and do we think they have a chance of getting to the World Series this year?
I think they can compete again. It all is whether if Jimmy Nelson can come back looking good, if that bullpen can figure, to do well as well, and if they're deep enough in pitching and can really solidify that throughout the rest of the season, I think that's where it'll happen. Obviously, it'd be nice to have Keston Hiura or one of those bottom of the order bats get going as well. But no, I think they will easily compete, at least for one of those wild card spots. For the rest of the year, they're projected through the next 115 games of the season. They're projected to go 59 and 56.
Yikes!
So not really great.
I think what they need to do is, I think their hitting will eventually come around. They just have too much talent in that lineup. It all comes down to pitching. But the Dodgers are the clear, I think, favorite in the NL, and which means I think the Brewers have to win the division. Otherwise, they're going to match up. They'll get the wild card game. If they win that, then they would have to face the Dodgers in the opening round. And with the way the Dodgers have played this year and just how much talent they have from top to bottom, that's not a team you want to see in the first full series you would have to play in the playoffs.
Right. Yeah. No, you would like to see them get the division, but boy, are the Cubs playing good. And like we mentioned earlier, some of their bats have woken up. Chris Bryant and Wilson Contreras. And their pitching has been one of the best in the league as well.
Well, and they have the talent, too, to win a World Series. And they had that same talent last year. They just didn't put it together. But it seems like this year, granted, guys are staying healthy, but they kind of just all are putting it together, which their pitching staff is deep, and that's going to be key as well. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a question from Owen. He asked, what do you see Keston Hiura becoming? Will he be arguably the better, one of the best second basemen that the Brewers have had over the course of the past couple of decades?
Ooh, that's interesting. Let's say their best second baseman they've had is what, Jim Gantner? And then
or that one season of Ricky Weeks.
Yeah, but like since they've had, they really haven't had a second baseman in our lifetime who's been consistently good. Ricky Weeks was a bust. Besides, his 1 year. I think Keston though is gonna be kind of a perennial all-star. Offensively, I think he's gonna be great, but he's not gonna be that well-rounded second baseman, which obviously the Brewers aren't concerned about defense as much. But I think it is a guy who is going to be kind of an all-star level player and going to hit for average, going to hit for home runs, and be just a consistent presence in a lineup for the next 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I agree. I think he has a very, very good shot at being the best Brewers second baseman in our lifetime.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt.
So far. As long as people don't panic on him, through a small sample size, we'll be good. And I'm not worried about him. I think he provides a lot of pop and like that hit for average. He should be good.
Yeah, I mean, the first time I'm going to really evaluate him is after 250 at-bats, because at that point, you've seen enough Major League pitching. It kind of shows if you're ready or not for Major League pitching, and at that point, then the Brewers, I think, should decide whether or not to keep him up or keep playing him every day. But right now, they have no better options at second base, so you got to play him. And I think with the way he's performed in the minor leagues since you drafted him in 2017, they have to stick with him and kind of hope he gives you that bat that he's shown he can produce. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the 3 and 2 What's He Gonna Do podcast. We appreciate you guys listening. Always send in those listener questions. We greatly appreciate our listeners listening and more than willing to debate over the topics you want us to discuss. Send those to us on Twitter or on Facebook at DanZelinski3 or at StatsSwipe. Thanks again for listening to this week's edition. We'll be back next week to talk more baseball.